Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chuck Diedrich, the Executive Director at the New York State Council of School Superintendents, and I want to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on equity in education, from discussion to action. We appreciate you taking an hour of your time to listen to this important topic. As we get further into action on equity items in education, we're seeing more and more troubling things happening across the country and across the state. One of the panelists today, Lorna Lewis, sent me some information last night that we're now trying to deal with from some people that do not accept that the thought of equity is something that's important for all people in our country and in our state. So we're dealing with that, but in the meantime, I do want to welcome all of you to this webinar, because hopefully together we will be able to spread the message that equity is important. And I want to thank you for joining us today. And I want to say a couple of words about ThoughtExchange in the meantime. First, we could not do all the work we do at the New York State Council of School Superintendents without help from our partners. Partners like ThoughtExchange, though, are irreplaceable. We use ThoughtExchange at the council for everything from our meetings with the Commissioner of Education to programs in equity, programs in our women's diversity program. We really use them for everything. And funny thing is, before we started using ThoughtExchange, we would try to convey information to the people that we were dealing with, and one person would write in an idea or a thought, and we felt that needed to be conveyed. Now, by using ThoughtExchange, we're really able to drill down to what's important, really in the minds of the vast majority of our members from around the state. And it has become so much easier and so much more efficient to communicate with the powers that be. So a big thank you to ThoughtExchange for being a partner with us, but especially a big thank you to ThoughtExchange for staying with us during the last year that we've had. Quite a few partners are no longer partners with us. They made that business decision. ThoughtExchange decided that they needed to stay with us, and we thank them for doing that. Today's program, we got some super panelists. All of the superintendents that are on here are people that I know well and think the world of. But another person who I think the world of is Kyle Works. Kyle is one of my main contacts at ThoughtExchange. He was one of my first contacts at ThoughtExchange. I not only consider him a colleague, but I consider him a friend. So I'd like to turn it over to Kyle and thank everyone for joining us again today for the last time. Kyle.
Thank you so much, Chuck. And thank you to the entire council. And I know that Chuck is on here, and behind the scenes, I know that Brandon, Deidre, and a number of other folks, Jazz, have all been involved in putting this on. Just want to say thank you again for the council and for all the work that you're doing throughout this year as well. So the goal is you're actually going to hear from Chuck and myself as little as possible, and we're going to be hearing from, instead of a really rich panel of folks, and then eventually we'll be handing it over for questions and questions and comments from all of you, and being able to pass those around our panelists as well. So our goal is to have you, or we will have you out of here by 2. And so just to give you a little bit of an idea, I'm going to talk for a few minutes, hopefully not 15, just a couple of minutes, and we'll pass it over to our panel here in a moment. I just want to acknowledge a couple of things. So first of all, just that we're able to have these conversations because of the hard work that's being done by other superintendents and leaders across the state. I know that the Council's Commission on Diversity and Inclusivity has done a lot of work in the area of equity, and they really laid the foundation for conversations like this, but for the work that's being done. I know there are lots of superintendents out there who are doing really great work, who are not on this panel as much as there are people who are doing great work on this panel. But I just want to acknowledge that that this is a small sampling of some of the incredible work that that is being done right now. So I wanted to quickly give a little bit of background as to what led to this this event today. So in the month of February and March, ThoughtExchange worked with the New York State BOCES to put on 2 roundtables, one upstate and one on Long Island. And these roundtables were on the topic of equity. And through those roundtables, as well as a couple of external exchanges that were run in conjunction with those roundtables, we heard the voices from 1,082 administrators and teachers representing over 180 school districts and BOCES and over 500,000 students. And so that work was really valuable, being able to bring more voices into a conversation around equity. And the result was over 27,000 data points that now we're being able to use to inform some of that work that's being done at the BOCES and district level as well. And the topic here is we talk about going from discussion to action on equity. Out of those roundtables, a couple of things came out. The first one was some of the common barriers that are being shared across the state. So there's some very unique things depending on whether you're Long Island or upstate. There's also a lot of common barriers to addressing inequity in our districts. The first one was simply a lack of structure and a platform for safe, lack of a platform, pardon me, for safe, inclusive conversation on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Really what it comes down to is just wanting to hear from more people, but people not necessarily feeling safe to be able to have these inclusive conversations without some of the biases that go along with it. The second common barrier that we found was the effect of intergenerational poverty on students' academic opportunities. This is not a barrier that's unique to education by any means. It strongly affects the way that districts are able to support their students. And finally, a lack of diverse hiring pipeline for staff, teachers, and administrators. And part of that led to a conversation around how do we better attract a diverse workforce? How do we better support leadership tracks for a diverse workforce? And some really great conversation came out of these. And then we also had some conversation on what are the next steps, and again, unique next steps depending on where you are, but some of the common ones that we found across the state. The first one was providing a safe and inclusive platform which all voices, especially those of students and families, can be heard. Hearing those stories, those experiences, those voices that are not normally heard can really impact the way that we perform as educators. Second one was addressing curriculum and teaching to be culturally inclusive and responsive. There's a lot that goes into that. That's not it's simple to write and a lot harder to operationalize. But it was a common thread again between these roundtables, that it's important to be able to come to a point where we can address these and provide an inclusive learning opportunity for all children that is again culturally inclusive and responsive. And this last one was take stock of our own personal biases and make this work personal and not conceptual. And this is something that's been shared by a number of people, including my colleague, Dr. Carpenter, who was a part of those roundtables. And the work that's being done there, he said it's really easy to say we need to do this, and we need to change this, and we are failing at this. It's a lot harder to say that I need to do this. This is my next step. This is where I am failing. This is my personal bias. And it's really important to be able to make this work personal, because until it's personal, we'll never actually take action. And so all of this leads now to this conversation today, which is really about what are, it's easy to talk about next steps, but how do we actually operationalize that? And so what we've done is we brought together a number of panelists who are in this work, who are operationalizing these action steps and more. And so our panel today, there's going to be four panelists. The first is David Wicks, who will be speaking in a moment. And David is the district superintendent for Eastern Suffolk BOCES. And there is a lot of, so David was very involved in our Long Island roundtable and the planning of it and the facilitation of it. And and through that, he's also doing a lot of work, not only in his BOCES, but with component districts as well. Dr. Lorna Lewis is a superintendent from Malvern United Union Free School District, formerly from Plainview Old Bethpage, and a past president for the New York State Council of School Superintendents. Dr. Lewis is a good friend, a valued colleague, and we're very excited to have her here as well. Dr. Jeff Matson is the district superintendent for Tompkins, Seneca, Tioga BOCES. Again, very involved in our upstate roundtable, the planning and facilitation of that. And again, doing a lot of work both in his BOCES and with component districts. And finally, Karen Craigs-Milne is the head of anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion here at ThoughtExchange. She's also, she and her partner are both consultants for the diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the corporate world. She brings a broad scope of experience in working on this with leaders and with teams. And so we're grateful again to have Karen and the rest of the group here. And I just want to, again, acknowledge that Dr. Carpenter was involved in the roundtables. If you were at any of those roundtables, you would have seen him there. Unfortunately, there was a family emergency and he's unable to join us today. So he sends his best wishes. He wishes he could have been here. And I also want to express gratitude for both Dr. Lewis and Ms. Craigs-Milne for stepping in last minute to be able to participate in this panel because again of some family emergencies that unfortunately made it impossible for some of our panelists to join us. So again, gratitude for those who joined us last minute and also for those who were able to participate today. So without any further ado, as I said, the goal is for you to hear from me as little as possible. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to invite my colleague David Wicks and to take our first, we call 5 minutes of fame. And so each panelist will have 5 minutes. We're going to talk through a bit of their work. And then at the end of that, we'll come, I'll introduce each one as we go. And at the end of it, we'll come back and we will run a thought exchange. I'll run through that process for those who are not familiar with it to gather questions and feedback from the group. And then our panelists will be addressing those for the duration of our time. Thank you so much. And David.
Thanks, Kyle. Does my sound good? Okay. So first thing, I got to make a note to update my headshot because that shot was taken when I was hired for this position, and there's far more gray hairs there now than there were back then. But I blame that on the pandemic. So if it's okay, I'm going to use my 5 minutes to walk the group through a little bit through my own personal journey with the diversity, equity, and inclusivity work that I'm involved in, and then give you kind of a high-level view of some of the things that are happening in Eastern Suffolk BOCES and in our region, and then anything more specific than that can come out in the Q&A. So about 8 years ago, if I were to describe myself with regards to DEI work, I would tell you that I was a well-intentioned educational leader that had absolutely no idea of my own implicit biases and of the role I played in the systems that were really detrimental to so many students. And I can tell you that the instant, I shouldn't say the instant, when I started into this work, it's changed the way I looked, not only at my career, but at the world. So it started with a couple of experiences that were really brought to me as opposed to me seeking them out. And that was work that for multiple reasons I was doing with a group called the Technical Assistance Center for Disproportionality out of NYU. And they worked with me and my district at the time on root causes for different levels of disproportionality amongst the students in our district. And right around that same time, I went through some training with a group called Erase Racism, which many of you likely are familiar with. And that was it. I mean, that's what hooked me. That's what started to teach me about things like implicit bias and white privilege and systemic racism and the literal segregation that exists in the area that I live in. And it was a shock to me. And I make a point of saying that because I had gone my entire life and my entire career, and I consider myself a fairly intelligent and observant person without knowing what any of those things meant. And it still concerns me to this day that that is something that someone could get to where I was at the time and really never be explicitly exposed to. And that's really what kind of led me down the road. So In 2016, I became the district superintendent of Eastern Suffolk BOCES. It was my first position in the BOCES, and I walked into a progressive and supportive board that had for a very long time been looking to the leadership in the BOCES and saying, what are we doing to change the way our workforce looks? We need to have a workforce, and this is something that many of us have heard before, that looks more like our students do. And what are we doing about that? And I joined this leadership team along with our chief operating officer, Dr. Julie Lutz, who has spent her career here. And about a half a year or so into my time here, we kind of sat down and said, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? Not only to make it look like we're doing something and to check the box, but to bring some significant change. And she and I were also continuing on our own personal learning journey, because again, like I said, this was new to me, but at the same time, I'm being asked to lead it. And so right around that same time, NYSCOSS put a call out to what became to be known as the Commission on Diversity and Inclusivity, which Kyle and Chuck both referred to earlier. I answered that call and became one of the founding members of that group. And so I was now automatically or immediately put into a situation where I had both regional and statewide structure that I was part of that was calling to action this work. And that was important because the work can be tough and lonely, and you need the support to make sure that you continue to fight. So some of the things that came out of that, the NYSCOSS Commission put on the first, I think it was the summer of 2018, the Ithaca Thought Symposium hosted at Ithaca City School District. And we went there with several of our leadership team and our board members. And amongst the many learning experiences we were given, we walked out with the beginnings of an action plan. And from that action plan, a couple of things blossomed. Our board was committed to a diversity, equity, and inclusivity committee. So a board level committee that drives policy and other board level decisions through a DEI lens. That group continues to meet several times a year. And we also started a DEI task force. So that was a call. So we employ about 2,400 full-time employees, and we invited every single one of them to be part of this task force. And we did have about 75 folks take us up on that opportunity. And these are people from cabinet level leadership to teaching staff to clerical staff to other types of support staff from all over the agency. And we spent about a year with them asking them to tell us what it was that we needed to do better. So that went very well, and that group continues to work. And I can expand more on that later if need be. And so we also focus, we're a BOCES, right? We provide services to the region. So we started to focus externally and saying, how can we support our school districts? Not only do we have to change and grow ourselves, but how can we support our school districts to do the same? So many of our regional professional development offerings, both single offerings and long-term kind of group work, we're focused on that. This year, in addition to being the BOCES district superintendent, I'm a member of the Suffolk County School Superintendent Association and was asked with my colleague from Western Suffolk BOCES to co-chair the association's first diversity, equity, and inclusivity committee. So I know I'm trying to get a lot out here within my 5 minutes of fame. I'm giving you a very high level of work, but I just need to let everybody know that this is something that's never going to be done. If you are just joining this work and it's foreign to you as it was to me, you're never going to be an expert on it. Don't expect to be, but know that if you don't take the step forward and do the work on behalf of the students and the individuals in our systems that need to be represented, that no one will. So you need to do that, and you need to take on that battle on all fronts. So Kyle, I'm going to stop there. And then, like I said, if there's any questions during the Q&A, I'm happy to expand on anything I just presented.
Thank you so much, David. And we will do, for those who are interested, we will do a Q&A at the end in which we'll run a thought exchange, allowing everyone to ask their questions or provide some commentary, and then our panelists will respond to them afterwards. So we'll have about 20 minutes at the end there for that. Thank you, David. And so now I'll call up our next panelist, which is Dr. Lorna Lewis. Lorna.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I know there are many friends who are on. I want to thank you for inviting me. I know it was the last minute, but I always say these are opportunities for me to reach out and engage with my colleagues on this most important issue. I was one of those members. I want to give honor to Pat Chris. Her name doesn't come up very often, but she was the president at the time who decided that this was the initiative that we needed to go after. And she really pulled together two chairs, Lavelle and Oliver, who came kicking and screaming at first, but they've done such a wonderful job of engaging us in the work. Along with David, I'm one of the founding members. When we first formed this, the commission, it was around the fact that we had very few people of color in the superintendency. That was the main focus. We had 732 districts in New York, and with a diversity that is soon becoming a majority, it is a majority students of color. And yet when we looked, we only had less at the time, about 39 superintendents of color. Well, I'm pleased to say that I do collect the statistics. I think that they've given me the database job. Somebody passed it on to me, and I'm very happy to do that. We have grown somewhat, but you'd be surprised. We only have 48 in the entire state of superintendents of color. A growing Latino, not Latina, growing Latino, and diminishing superintendents, Black superintendents, increasing Asian superintendents. So it's really interesting when we look at our student population is very much in growing Latinx population and superintendents of color. But yet when we look at our teaching staff, when we look at all of the people who are in charge of the trajectories of our students' lives, they don't reflect it. The hiring does not reflect it. So that was our first focus, is to build capacity for not only bringing superintendents of color into the pipeline, which is important. So you have to begin with the teacher pipeline and then grow those. But also, most important, and this is something I go at every time I have an opportunity, is supporting those superintendents that are brought on board. What's happening is that when a school board chooses a superintendent of color, the commitment of the community and the board has to be there, because what I'm finding, and I am collecting that data, I hope to write a paper for NYSCOSS someday, is that those superintendents get 1 3-year contract and they're out. And once those superintendents of color are out, they don't get an opportunity to be a superintendent someplace else. Very few actually survive. So once we bring those into our community, we need to provide ways to build the capacity of that. The other thing that we need to pay attention to is that it's wonderful that the state education has supported our work. And I was just speaking with a commissioner on the diversity issue and, having to do the policies. But the readiness of communities to accept those policies is equally important, because what we're finding, communities are rejecting those movements in DEI in the name of Marxism and all of the things that you hear that are on one certain channel that I won't mention on television. But you have to bring your community into readiness to accept that DEI. And so I applaud the work that is being done by Rush Henrietta, by the work that's done in Oceanside. There are so many communities that have really done the work to build the capacity within the community so that we are not doing this alone. They're not superintendents going out on their own, but the community starts to embrace the value of DEI. That is the work that needs to be done, because I am seeing some crises occurring on Long Island And I'm sure I've heard of it in other places in Westchester where the communities are not ready to accept DEI policies. And I think that will be our next step. So we have a lot of work to do. I'm ready to do it. NYSCOSS and NYSBA together, we can do this. So I'm happy to be in the work, and I think I need to stay within my time period.
Thank you so much, Lorna. Both you and Dave, I hate cutting anyone off. It's just it's really rich conversation here. So next we'll have Dr. Jeff Matson. Jeff. Oh, I can't hear you.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see everybody. I hope you hear me now. It's good to be here, and I've had several opportunities to be talking about this work with other folks, and the journey that has gotten me to this point to even be able to have these kind of discussions. And really, I come from a rural upstate background, majority culture that basically was insulated from these kind of issues because you didn't see diversity until you left those communities. And many of us in upstate rural communities don't leave our communities until we become young adults. If we do, when we're in school, we're very closely supervised. So we don't interact with people who are that different from us. So it really, in my career, has been important to make sure that we give our students opportunities to be in cosmopolitan environments and interact with people who are not like them or they don't look like them, and find that people are people, and people are pretty wonderful everywhere, and there's some challenging people everywhere. And we need to remember that when we're making policies and making opportunities happen for students. And opportunities is the place where I want to spend another minute or two, because I think Lorna hit on something really important about the preparation for some communities for this work. Some of it, I think, has to do with a scarcity mentality versus an abundance mentality. There are people who actually believe that if we create opportunities for others, that they're going to lose something. We are in the richest country in the world, the richest generation in history, with more opportunities you can shake a stick at. And we need to do a better job of demonstrating that we're expanding opportunities, not stealing from one group to give to another, and that we all need to be in this together. And we're in the public sector, which means we're in it for the entire public. So trying to shift our messaging from one of scarcity to abundance is really important, and hitting that up front early on, that we're here in the public system to make sure every student is seen as every student has an opportunity. It's real important. And I think COVID has taught us one major thing, especially with this work. We were forced to see every student as an individual. Every student had their own little block on our computer, and we had to meet the needs of every single student and every single family. So I think this has put this work on steroids. I'm hoping that that happens, and I know that there are some political ramifications, but there are some things we could all be doing, and we've tried to do in our region. And I'm grateful to come from a region where we had Ithaca City School District, where they had been doing equity work for 30 years, and they've developed report cards. And now you've seen it expand to other school districts around us, but we have seen some regrettable pushback in some areas where the superintendent directly has been a focus, not for anything the superintendent necessarily has done, but for allowing the conversation to go forward. Folks, it's going to require courageous leadership, simply of allowing the conversation to go forward and do our job as educators. And educators educate. There are some quick win type things that we can do, and that is to really look deeply at our policies to make sure we can go through and just clean up the language within our policies that we have before we go shifting to huge policies, ensuring that everyone has equal opportunity, which is what we are committed to. And our hiring practices, making sure our language in our documents match our language on our websites, because people know you can say a great thing in a hiring document to try to get someone to apply, but they're going to go to school on you And if what they see on your website and your background materials is not one that shows that you're inclusive or accepting of other people, they're not coming, and you're not going to get alignment between your staff and your students. Those are just a couple things. Always have a lot more to say about this, but again, just want to emphasize that we need to help steer the conversation in a very productive, positive area. We're trying to create opportunities for all kids.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Yeah, lot to hope. Looking forward to a really robust Q&A here, so we can hear more about that as well. Now, for our final panelist, I'll call up Karen Craigs-Milne. Karen.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be with all of you. And let me start by acknowledging that I don't live in the world of being an educator, although my husband works for a school board in Canada. And so I listened very deeply to the challenges and conversations that he's having in his role. So what I wanted to contribute to this conversation is, I think, zooming out a little and thinking about things that have helped in other spaces when we do this work. And one of the key messages that I want to share today is that we must be clear that diversity and inclusion work does not equal anti-racism work. These two types of work are very distinct. And until we understand that difference and make sure that we're conscious of the work that we're doing and where it falls inside of these two worlds of work, we're going to be missing the bar. And what do I mean by that? When we're looking at diversity, we're often looking at issues of representation. We're looking at quotas and numbers and, do we have enough students of color? Do we have enough teachers of color? That's very important. Do we have administrators who are people of color? Very important. But if we don't address the power dynamics within which these people are introduced and given opportunities and spaces, guess what? Nothing changes. In fact, we set them up to fail. I've had these conversations when it comes to board leadership. I've had these conversations when it comes to senior management. The same applies no matter what system we're looking at. And so, when we are in the space of a sector like education, it often becomes a job and very bureaucratic. And we forget that the soul of education is social justice. It, in and of itself, it is a transformative tool for society. It opens opportunities. It creates doors to new worlds that generations have not had access to. And so we need to shift the way we do this work from being a bureaucratic exercise and a checking the box exercise to a social justice exercise, and one that is centered on the question, how can we do right by people who have consistently over time been marginalized, excluded, and left behind? And it doesn't matter whether you're a teacher in the front of the room, whether you're a lunch person supporting kids during lunchtime, whether you're the janitor. If you ask the question, what can I do from where I'm sitting to do the right thing, to acknowledge and create space and safety for those who are in my purview? If you can show up every day asking these questions, what you do and how you do will change. Now, one of the frameworks that I use in this work is, it has 4 elements to it, and I find it helpful when I'm working with organizations to say, look at what you're doing from these 4 lenses. One lens is the diversity lens. We just talked about that. Representation. How many people? Let's check the numbers. Let's do the employee or student survey, and let's see who's missing. And then let's talk about what do we do to open the doors for them so that they can join us. But that in and of itself is not enough. So the second lens we need to use is one around needs and barriers. What are the unique needs and barriers of different groups of people in our system? Do we understand them? If we don't, right there is action we need to take. Do we understand what is in the way for specific groups? And what are the needs that they have that we need to meet? And it's so obvious when you think of people with different abilities. If you're a student in a wheelchair, you have specific needs. You cannot physically access a building until the building has been designed to meet your needs. So, you can use that lens with multiple groups, neurodiverse students, Black students, Indigenous students, and you start to see that there are unique needs that we must put front and center to our strategies, and the actions that we can take can be developed with their input in mind. The third lens is the one around transformation. And this is where we get into the heart of social justice work. We need to acknowledge that we live in societies and systems that are deeply prejudiced, that are colonially, significantly impacted, and that need to be redesigned and transformed. And as we heard, the social relationships in the communities that we're in are a big factor in that work. So what are we doing to build partnerships? What are we doing to develop relationship? What are we doing to foster trust amongst groups that have been brought up to not trust each other? That transformation is key, including the trust between the student and the teacher and the administrator and the parent. So that's a major piece of work that we need to do around transforming relations. But the last one, which we often forget, we focus on all these things, we do all these things, but the last one, which is so important, is doing no harm in the process. How are we ensuring that as we implement strategies, as we take actions, that we are not causing further harm? And you can see that when you look at equity initiatives that are designed to bring more students of color into a system that is not set up for them, they end up having, physical harm, bullying, offensive language, they're threatened, they feel unsafe. Guess what? We caused that because we introduced the opportunities for them to be in that system without doing the work we needed to do. So we must be responsible for the actions we take, understanding and anticipating where harm might happen, the unintentional outcomes, and then taking actions to mitigate those as part of the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you to all of our panelists. I have been scribbling notes, and I am hopeful that the rest of you have as well. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that for the first time in maybe the history of online presentations, we are 2 minutes ahead of schedule. So just thank you to everyone for sticking to our times. I'm very impressed. Now we're going to hear from you folks. And so there are 46 people on this call. I'm going to share my screen here in a moment. We're going to run through an exchange, which is going to ask you just for your questions, comments for the panel. What we're going to do is I'll share my screen actually right away so people can get right in. And I'll quickly talk through what that means. So if you're also going to see a link dropped into the chat from our ThoughtExchange webinars group. So you can click that link or scan that QR code. So if you have a mobile device, which I will do, I will scan that code. And it's a matter of participating. So you're going to be asked to, never participated in exchange before, you're going to be asked to share an answer to this question. What thoughts, questions, or comments do you have for the panelists? And you want to see other people's thoughts and rate those on a scale of 1 to 5. And the idea here is we're going to hear what's most important to the group. So we're going to prioritize the questions. And so things that are top of mind for everyone here, we will be able to then address at the panel. And then anything we don't get a chance to address to right now, we will try to address maybe in a follow-up as well. So this is your chance to participate and have your voice be heard here as well. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to invite all of us to participate. If you have any problems getting to the exchange or have any questions, just drop something in the chat. My colleagues are on the line as well, and they can support you.
Carl, is it possible to hear a little bit more from Karen?
I always want to hear more from Karen.
Yeah, I thought her four lenses was just absolutely fascinating. And the fresh ideas that's come, you know, as we have this wait time is always deadly. I just wonder if Karen wanted to, if we could use a little bit of that time to her to just go a little bit more in depth into those four lenses, particularly the do no harm lens.
Sure. I'll invite Karen if she's willing, and I'm actually just going to jump over here. So as thoughts are being populated, we're going to see them come up here, and we'll see them get prioritized. So again, if you have not participated yet, please go in. We have 2.5 minutes. Share a thought, and then go through and please rate other people's thoughts as well. And Karen, if you are willing and able, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So yes, I put that framework together based on working globally for 20 years on equity issues and just seeing patterns. And the one around doing no harm is really key because, you know, the question that we often ask is, we've done so much, why aren't we making progress? And often the reason why we're not making progress is because in our doing, we've created steps backwards. We've hurt people along the way. We've created new issues. And so, you know, when we introduce that lens, it's about, you know, you could look at it as risk mitigation. You could look at it as, you know, just mapping out the potential unintended impacts or harm. And for those who've worked in social spaces or education spaces long enough, you know, if I do this, I'm likely to see this pushback. Because at the end of the day, whenever we create change, we are dealing with power dynamics, and we are dealing with people's insecurities, and we are dealing with our conceptions of zero-sum gain. If they're getting a prom for the Black people, what about us? You know, why do they think they're better than us? And so you're going to see social reactions to new strategies that you're implementing, which are often seen as giving a group advantage, and often a group that is seen as undeserving of that advantage. And so until you deal, one way to mitigate the harm is to focus very strongly on the transformation element in your strategy. So, you know, what that means then as a school system is, rather than always looking at inside the classroom, the teacher-student dynamic, or inside the bureaucracy of superintendent, administrator, you know, elements, those are important, but asking the question, how do we really dig deep on the transformative elements of trust, partnership, collaboration? A big piece to that puzzle, and then I'll stop, is the role of the family and of community agencies in understanding risk and resilience of students and their ability to succeed in a system. And so when you develop a transformative approach, part of what you're doing is stepping outside of the normal boxes that you work within in terms of how I frame success, or how I frame failure for a student, or how I frame whether a teacher has done their job or not. And it's really stepping outside of what you know and saying, what could I learn that could enhance my perspective, that could deepen my relationship, that could help me serve the person I'm here to serve, and not tick the box in my job. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Yeah, I see the question on my steps. I will add them to the chat for anyone who wants.
Thank you. I was going to give just a couple seconds to rate a couple more thoughts. I know if you were like me, you probably stopped rating anything because you wanted to listen to Karen. So let's take a couple seconds here, and but I think we have a really good spot to start from anyways. So we'll get rolling here. So first of all, thank you for everyone who participated in this exchange. This is a quick way to be able to hear from all of you. And I'm going to stop the exchange now so that we can, so it's going to stop jumping around on me. And so this is a great question, and I'm going to, this one, that's why. This question here is, how do you recommend we start this conversation with our communities? I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm actually going to ask, I'll start maybe with Lorna, if you want to maybe speak to this, and then I'll invite anyone else who wants to as well. But I know, Lorna, you brought this up talking with your community, so you want to speak a little more to that.
Right. You know, there are lots of different tools one can use to have the conversation. with communities. You know, there are different communities within communities. First of all, your faculty, your staff that you know who are working with students all the time. You know, I'll go back to what I did in my former district. I am on the board for Erase Racism, so I tapped into their strengths, and we did a whole Unraveling Racism training, which was a requirement for particularly for our guidance counselors, social workers, that cadre of folks and our teachers, because you know, understanding microaggressions, understanding some of the things that you do that you're not even aware of, the barriers that you're setting up by your conversations, you know, little things like children, you know, if you have a large Asian community who brings their own lunch in, you know, someone saying, well, you know, I can't stand the smell, or, you know, you can't, you know, what are you bringing for lunch? Why don't you have the cafeteria food? It looks better. Or just simple things that people don't even realize what their microaggressions are. So that Unraveling Racism training within your community, but also using the ThoughtExchange to gather ideas about from the community. I remember when I had a particular issue, and I used the ThoughtExchange to get in conversations started, and then doing forums. I mean, I am a big proponent of community forums. That, you know, you bring people in, you have them meet each other, exchange ideas, running, you know, doing the roundtable conversations. You know, and COVID kind of stopped a lot of that, but we can still do that online. But really, if you're not processing these things and you just simply move to what the state is asking us to do, is to establish DEI policies without having that conversation, then you're going to run into a buzzsaw with people who are just not ready to, and I think, Jeff, you just hit the nail on the head when you talked about, you started out, I think I took notes on what you said, that scarcity versus abundance, you know, because it's like, if you get something, it's because I've lost something. And, you know, it's, you know, and I'm it's so important that we kind of say, you know, there is a way to win-win. There is a way to lead us all so that, you know, having those conversations and making sure that we're all included and that everyone has opportunities. You know, if we don't educate our youth, and then you have a segment of our youth that becomes, you know, are not skilled for what is needed in the 21st century, we all lose. So if you have to make that conversation go from scarcity and abundance to a win-win, that we all, it's the rising tide, it's the old cliche. We all benefit when all children have those opportunities to grow into caring adults, caring, thinking adults. And that's the conversation that has to happen within the community. So I'd say forums and working within your staff. Professional development has to be done with staff, because they don't even realize that they have these biases, and that those biases cause barriers to occur. That's why I love what Karen said with those 4 lenses. I absolutely think that that's work that we have to plunge into.
Thank you, Lorna. And the next pieces actually are like 3 of the next 4 thoughts are actually about resistance and how do you address resistance internally, externally with your board. And Laura, you touched on that a little bit. Thank you. And Dave, and then maybe Jeff as well, if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit to how you are either doing it in your own BOCES or, you know, with working with your component districts as well.
Sure. Well, I can't speak to the board resistance because I'm blessed with a 15-member board, Kyle, and every single one of them want us to do this work. So that really is instrumental to what we've been able to do here. But so resistance is you're going to hit that every step of the way. Like I said, when the chief operating officer and I kind of looked to each other and said, how are we going to lead this work? And once we got ourselves to a point where we were ready to turn to the agency and say, hey, look what we're doing, it was actually, we got back from the first Ithaca Thought Symposium, and we had our own internal administrative leadership retreat. So about 100 of our our leaders, and we gave a presentation on what we learned at the Ithaca conference and how we were going to move forward with that, expecting everybody else to embrace it as much as we are, because these are the leaders of this great agency, right? And we were met with crickets, and then followed up afterwards with some emails that were less than enthusiastic about the work that we were doing. So we had to kind of, and that's really where our task force came from, because we kind of said, okay, not everybody at the leadership level is ready for this. We need to seek out those that are. So that's one thing, you know, be persistent and to look in different areas. And then as far as outward facing, this is an agenda item in every single leadership meeting we have, both internally and externally. And I'll never forget the first time we put this on an agenda with one of our superintendent groups, and Julie, the chief operating officer, and I spoke about the work that we were doing. We were met with collegial silence, because no one really wanted to enter the conversation. But we kept at it, and we just said, and it was just something we added to every single agenda, every chance we had to speak about it. And almost a year to the day from that same meeting, we brought it up again. And out of the 11 people that were at the meeting, 4 or 5 of them were active in the conversation. So it's slow. You need to be persistent. You need to be prepared to be disappointed. And most importantly, you need to find the small victories that you accomplish and celebrate them. Because you'll find them, they're there. They're not going to be, you're not going to change your demographics and your staff overnight. You're not going to change every policy in your policy book through an anti-racist lens overnight. That work is going to take time, but you will make accomplishments, and you need to celebrate them.
I guess what I would add is a couple internal examples. You know, one, doing a thought exchange internally, which always gets you great information, and the best ideas do rise to the top, and actually is inspiring because you realize how committed people, educators are to their craft, that they really do love these kids and want to make sure they meet the needs of every individual. But there's also those people who are afraid of being judged about who they are, the way they've chosen to live their life, whatever. And that's an opportunity to respond to that in as general terms or as specific terms as you can as a leader, to ensure that, okay, we're not going to be attacking anyone. We're going to be educating everyone. That's what our job is going to be. A second thing that I know that we've run into is when we're working on the hiring process, the first question when you're trying to really draw in more diverse candidates is, well, we're still going to hire the most qualified candidate, right? Well, I mean, it goes without saying, but for someone to actually believe that we're trying to water down the candidate pool really is another feeling of being threatened, that we're going to water things down and somehow we're not going to be as good as we always were. It's scarce. There's only so much talent in the world, and boy, it's shoehorned into this group. And if we bring another group in, they're not going to be as good. And that is a mentality that we need to educate out of our systems, that there are wonderful candidates that just don't even have the chance to apply because they won't be considered because of whatever, the holes in their resume, because of the way they were growing up or where they grew up. Sometimes it is just simply the address they had on their application. And we need to educate ourselves out of the biases in the hiring process so the most talented person will end up in a position. So those are a couple examples that I know that we run into.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And so we're getting close to time here. So what I'm going to do is a few. So we actually those cover the 2 biggest topics of the exchange. There's a few direct questions, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go ask each of you to take 1 minute here. I see, Karen, you've already just dropped your holistic framework in there, which is perfect, because that was one of the big questions. But Karen, if you could take 1 minute, share a few additional resources that you would recommend for folks who are maybe new to this work, or are looking for continual personal development, and then any final thoughts you have as well on this conversation, and we'll just give you 1 minute, and then I'll have an additional question for each of you.
Oh, there's so many resources. Don't put me on the spot like that. I'm happy to share some links afterwards. I think, you know, the thing to say about resources there is that there are a lot of them, and there's plenty of guidance and examples and support you can get. What you need to do is make sure that you don't get stuck in wanting to learn more and learn more and learn more and not taking action. That's super important. Like you know, I say this to white people, I say this to people who are not trained in DE&I say this to everybody. We can all take action exactly where we are with not one more book read, not one more policy passed, not extra budget in our hands. And so the question should be, what can I do with what I have right now? And related to that, the last thought I want to share with you is, you know, one of the things that comes up a lot is we don't have budget. And I just want to help you unpack that for a second because it's a big one. So there's a difference between mainstreaming DE&I work and integrating DE&I work, and understanding this distinction is very important. When we're integrating DE&I work, we are adding on to business as usual, and we are not changing anything about the way we do it. But when we're mainstreaming, we're looking at every component of what we're doing and saying, how can we do it better? And when you're doing it better, you don't always need more money to do that. So please, you know, be open to the possibility of simply changing the way you do something without always needing budget to take action.
That's great. Thank you, Karen. That's really great. And thank you to Carla in the group who just messaged the panelists here. She shared two resources in the chat, which I'll share back with the attendees here as well. David, I'm going to come to you next, and again, take 1 minute, or we're getting closer, maybe 30 seconds. Final thoughts, but also someone had asked, you know, what advice do you have for those who are tasked to lead in this equity work? But I know this kind of comes off of Karen's comment, but feel unequipped to do so. They're new to the space, just like you were when you started leading it. Any advice for folks who are coming into this leadership position and feeling a little overwhelmed?
Sure. Real quick, I mean, just like many other things in leadership, enter it with collaboration and humility in mind, and be very honest from the beginning. Just to be very honest that there are things here that you're going to be learning, and your first experiences with the people that you're leading should be learning experiences. You should be sitting with the folks that you're trying, you know, within the system you're trying to change, and learning with them, not dictating the work, but you know, going through the learning experiences with the folks that you lead. So I would say that, and my final thought, and it kind of rolls off of what Lorna was saying at first, engage your students. You want to know what's happening in your schools, engage your students. We did 2 Thought Exchange based events here on the island with students from across the island, from all different types of districts that we represent here. And you'd be amazed, or maybe you wouldn't be amazed by what they're saying about what's happening in their school buildings. So you want to know how to engage your community, hear what your kids are saying about what's happening in your buildings, and turn around to your community and say, here's what your kids are experiencing, what should we do about it? And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Dave. And Jeff, you know, same thing, final thoughts, and also what are, a similar question to Dave, but what is the next, you know, someone who's just entering this work, what's the first thing, the most important thing maybe that you suggest that as a leader, that first step that you should be taking?
So I think it comes down to the difference between being a spectator and being an actor. I think the thing I got out of the Ithaca Symposium a couple of years ago, and when the DEI work first started with NYSCOSS, was we can't just turn to Oliver Robinson and Lavelle Brown to do the work and then just keep bringing them in to give talks. That this has to be something that we own, and we're the actors, not the spectators. It's not good enough that way, and it's not good enough to just not be an overt problem. You must be part of the solution if you're going to call yourself a public educator, because you have a responsibility to every child that walks through your door.
Thanks, Jeff. And we are right at time, but I really want to give the final comment here to Dr. Lewis. So Lorna, any final thoughts you have? And also there's one question here, just if there's one challenge that you've faced that you've facing in moving this work forward, and what are some of the things that you've done to address that?
The challenge is in the first lens that Karen spoke about, it's in representation. You know, I'm a Black woman, have a very successful superintendent. I say that proudly. And the challenge is for us to have more people like myself to increase our numbers so that children of color can see models that are like me, not just in the cooks and the cleaners, but in administration. And I just want to end with, you know, our students are the promise of the future, and the work that we do right now with students, and we're being very careful about that, will assure us a very different future. And that the work, the DEI work, is such powerful, important work. I applaud my colleagues for even having the conversation. Please keep that conversation going. It's the only way that we can assure a different future.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you to NYSCOSS for their partnership in producing this event. And as you see in the chat there, ThoughtExchange is hosting an Education Leadership Summit on May 11th. We welcome all of you to please join us for that. There's a registration link there. I think it's about 4.5 hours, but it's a join us what you can. There's a fair bit packed into it. I won't get into it now. We can send you more information. Thank you again. And please have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.